You have probably heard of Ozempic. You may know someone on it or debating whether they should be. And to be fair, the results are real. Clinical trials confirm semaglutide produces 15 to 20% reductions in total body mass. By pharmaceutical standards, that is extraordinary, but here is what the headline never tells you. Up to 39% of the weight you lose on Ozempic is not fat, it is muscle. The tissue keeping your metabolism efficient, your joints stable, your body functional as you age. And the largest semaglutide trial ever conducted, the Step 1 trial, followed participants after they stopped the drug. Within 1 year, they had regained 2/3 of everything they lost, even with continued lifestyle support. Now, step back 2,000 years and consider this. The Roman legionary, who were marching 20 miles every day in sandals and carrying 80 pounds of equipment through heat that would shut down a modern construction site, had no body fat problem. And the reason has nothing to do with who they were. It has everything to do with what they did. Instead, it is due to 4 specific habits so deeply built into the structure of their day that their bodies had no other biological option but to stay lean. By the end of this video, you are going to understand exactly why your body stores fat in the first place, and why almost everything you have been told about fixing it is working against your own biology. The first 3 habits will shift how you train and eat, but the 4th one is different. It is a single daily ritual that takes less than 30 seconds, costs almost nothing, and quietly changes the way your body handles every meal you eat for the rest of the day. Stay with me, because that one is worth waiting for. And if this is the kind of knowledge nobody ever taught you, hit subscribe now, because there is a lot more of this coming. It all begins with something you already do every single day, just at the wrong intensity, the wrong duration, and without the one variable that turned an ordinary walk into a metabolic engine. The loaded march. Let us start with what the Roman military march actually looked like in physical terms. 20 miles of ground every single day on campaign, all while wearing 80 pounds of armor, weapons, entrenching tools, and rations strapped to the body. Now, this was not a training program. They were simply moving armies from one location to another, and the metabolic consequences that came with it were entirely incidental. But those consequences were enormous. Modern sports science gives us precise language to describe why. Loaded walking at that pace and weight keeps the body at roughly 60 to 70% of maximum heart rate. Researchers call this Zone 2, a specific intensity band where the body burns fat as its primary fuel source, rather than drawing on glycogen or breaking down muscle, meaning you are burning fat directly from reserves. A study published in Medicine and Science in Sports and Exercise found that consistent Zone 2 training increased fat oxidation rates by up to 30% in just 8 weeks. That adaptation does not plateau. It compounds the longer you sustain the stimulus. As a result, your body becomes fundamentally better at burning fat as a default. Dr. Peter Attia, one of the most cited longevity researchers working today, recommends 180 minutes of Zone 2 per week as a minimum meaningful metabolic target. That is 25 minutes of brisk walking every single day. The Roman legionary was hitting that target 10 times over, with weight on his back, before the main meal of the day. And that last part, the weight, is the variable. Almost everyone skips. A loaded backpack or vest raises your heart rate into Zone 2 at a pace you can sustain comfortably, without jogging, without a track, and without any fitness background. 10 to 15 pounds is enough to push a brisk walk into the exact fat-burning zone the Roman legionary occupied for hours every single day. But here is the deeper point. The legionary was not exercising. He was moving because the world required it that day. The fat burning was a consequence of structure, not intention. And that distinction matters more than almost anything else in this video. Because the moment fat loss becomes a protocol that depends on daily motivation, most people stop within weeks. The Roman could not stop. The march was just the shape of the day. Now, the march covers the output side of the equation. But the second habit determined when that fat burning was most metabolically effective. It comes down to a single decision about timing that almost nobody gets right, even people who are otherwise very deliberate about their health. The fasted training. The Roman military historian Vegetius documented it directly in Epitome Rei Militaris, the most comprehensive surviving account of how the legionary force trained and operated. Weapons drills, formation exercises, obstacle work, load marches. All of it was scheduled. Before the main meal of the day, the men trained in a physical state modern nutrition science would describe as low-fed and low insulin. Vegetius was not describing a metabolic strategy. The Romans trained before eating because that was when the schedule placed training, likely because preparing and distributing food for thousands of men takes time, and the morning hours before that process completed were most available for drilling. But the biology responded to the structure regardless of the reason behind it. And here is what this response actually looks like. A 2023 systematic review analyzed 28 separate randomized controlled trials comparing fasted exercise to fed state exercise across a range of populations and training conditions. Fasted exercise produced significantly greater fat oxidation than fed state exercise in every single study included. But here is the study that makes this impossible to dismiss. Researchers at the University of Leuven placed two groups of healthy men on an identical diet, high fat, high calorie, deliberately excessive, for 6 weeks. Both groups trained the same amount, doing the same exercises for the same duration. The only difference was timing. One group trained after eating, the other trained fasted. The group that trained after eating gained significant weight on the excess calories. The group that trained fasted did not gain significant weight on the exact same diet, consuming the exact same number of calories, and their muscles' capacity to absorb glucose from the bloodstream rather than store it as body fat increased by 28% over the course of the trial. That is a structural metabolic adaptation driven entirely by the sequence in which movement and eating happened. The principle is not the intensity of the training. It is not what you eat or how much. It is the order. And the Roman soldier was not making a fresh decision about this every morning. The habit was therefore completely independent of motivation, mood, or willpower. Now, here is something that is genuinely surprising. The third habit has nothing to do with movement at all. And it is the most counterintuitive fat loss mechanism in this entire video, because it works by making food deliberately worse. The ration principle. Have you ever noticed how you can sit down to eat when you are not particularly hungry, but if the food is interesting enough, rich and layered and new, you finish the whole plate and want more? Yet on other occasions, eating the same straightforward meal you have had 100 times, you reach a natural stopping point and simply do not want to continue. That is not discipline in the second case, and a lack of it in the first. That is a documented biological mechanism operating exactly as designed. And it is the mechanism the Roman legionary ration exploited with ruthless consistency. The legionary ate pulse, wheat porridge boiled in water with salt and a scrape of olive oil. He ate bucculatum, twice-baked hardtack so dry it had to be softened in liquid before it could be chewed without risk of breaking a tooth. Next to it was hard sheep cheese and occasional salted meat. The same rotation every single day with almost no variation and almost no palatability. But here is where it gets interesting. This was not an unfortunate consequence of limited supply. It was, at least in part, the intended design of a military feeding system refined across centuries of practical experience. Nutrition science has a precise name for what that monotonous ration was exploiting. Sensory-specific satiety is the documented mechanism by which eating the same food repeatedly causes your appetite for that specific food to decline as you consume it. Each bite of the same thing makes the next bite slightly less appealing. You stop naturally when you are full because you have no appetite left to override the signal. But introduce a new flavor, a new texture, a new combination of tastes, and your appetite resets completely, even if you were satisfied moments before. The new thing triggers a fresh wave of desire that has nothing to do with your body's actual energy needs. A study testing this directly found that participants offered 4 courses of different foods consumed 44% more across the meal than participants offered 4 courses of the same food. That is not a small effect. That is the difference between chronic overeating and not, generated entirely by food design, not by willpower. A comprehensive review of 39 separate studies concluded that increased dietary variety is directly associated with higher body weight and greater body fat across populations. Now look at ultra-processed food through this lens, because it is not an accident these products are designed the way they are. Every combination of fat, sugar, salt, and engineered texture in a processed snack is the product of laboratory research specifically aimed at defeating sensory-specific satiety. It is about maintaining palatability across an entire sitting and triggering desire for the next thing the moment you finish the current one. The signal to stop never arrives. You eat past fullness because the food was engineered to make that happen. But let me be clear, you do not need to eat bland porridge for the rest of your life. The principle is directly applicable right now. Reduce the variety in your everyday eating environment. Identify 3 or 4 genuinely nutritious staple meals and rotate them through the week. Stop purchasing foods specifically engineered to defeat your body's satiation response. Lastly, there is one more layer to what the Romans were doing. It is so simple, so utterly basic, that when I found the modern science behind it, I could not quite believe it had been sitting in military records for 2,000 years without anyone connecting the dots. It was called Posca. Every Roman legionary drank Posca, every single day on campaign, without exception. So, what exactly was it? Vinegar mixed with water. That is the entire recipe. The Romans drank it because it was cheap, stable enough to transport across long campaigns without spoiling, and refreshing in heat, where plain water was not. On top of that, the sharpness of the vinegar would mask the taste of questionable water, and the acidity would have helped to kill off certain bacteria. But apparently, the benefits are not only limited to the Romans. A systematic review analyzed 16 separate randomized controlled trials involving 910 participants across multiple countries and health conditions. The consistent finding across all 16 trials was that regular acetic acid supplementation, acetic acid being the active compound responsible for vinegar's sharp taste, significantly reduced fasting blood glucose, reduced triglyceride levels, and reduced body mass index across the entire study population. A separate study from Lund University found that consuming vinegar alongside a meal reduced the post-meal blood sugar spike to a degree equivalent to a 64-point reduction on the glycemic index. The mechanism is straightforward. Acetic acid slows the rate at which the stomach empties after eating, which slows the rate at which glucose enters the bloodstream. Slower glucose entry means a smaller insulin response. And a smaller insulin response matters enormously because insulin is your body's primary fat storage hormone, the signal that tells cells to convert circulating glucose into stored fat. Blunt that post-meal insulin spike, which acetic acid does measurably and consistently, and you meaningfully reduce the amount of each meal that ends up stored as fat. So come back to where we started, because the Ozempic story and the Roman story are ultimately about the same thing. The Step 1 trial showed 2/3 of the weight was regained within a year of stopping the drug. It is not because the drug failed, but because the food environment that built the problem in the first place was entirely unchanged. The movement patterns were unchanged. The daily structure, the defaults and rhythms that governed how much people ate and how much they moved, was completely intact the moment the injection stopped. The Roman legionary was lean, not because he was more disciplined than you. He was lean because these 4 habits were not choices he made each day after consulting his motivation levels. They were the shape of the day itself. So how can you implement these practices today? Start with the following. Every morning, before breakfast, practice 20 to 30 minutes of walking with a loaded backpack. 10 to 15 pounds pushes your heart rate into zone 2 at a comfortable walking pace. That single habit combines the loaded march and the fasted training in one movement, done before the day has given you a reason not to. For the ration principle, identify 3 or 4 genuinely good meals and rotate them through the week. Stop bringing foods into your home that were engineered in a laboratory to override your body's satiation response. Before your main meal tonight, have 1 tablespoon of apple cider vinegar in a glass of water. Make sure to do this before eating, not after. No monthly subscription. No muscle loss. No 2/3 of it coming back the year after you stop. The Romans never solved the fat problem. They never developed it, because their lives were built in a way that made fat accumulation structurally difficult. Now you know exactly how that structure worked, but this structure is just one piece of a larger system. The complete framework, the fasting structure, the light protocol, the recovery architecture, and the training method that ties them together is in the guide linked in the description. It is built on the same principles, grounded in the same history, applicable without rebuilding your life from the ground up. Check out the full guide in my description.